This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. We talk a lot about ground game and voter contact on this show, and CampaignSidekick.vote is where you'll find the best tools on the market. I've been involved with Campaign Sidekick for more than 5 years, and we're working to make it better every single day. So go to CampaignSidekick.vote to get a free demo or sign up for an account today. This week's guest is Chris Wilson, the former Director of Research and Analytics for the Ted Cruz for President campaign, where he oversaw all polling, data analytics, and modeling, as well as digital strategy. There's been a great deal written about the sophisticated data and research programs that powered the Cruz campaign, from Bloomberg to Fox Business and the Washington Post. Chris was at the helm of those efforts. Put quite simply, Chris and his team know what they're talking about. Under Chris's expertise and leadership, WPA has grown to be known as the go-to research and analytics firm for the conservative right community. Senator Mike Lee of Utah, a leading conservative Republican, said that, quote, Chris Wilson is the best in the business. We feel lucky to have him involved. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas stated, quote, the team at WPA is the best in the business, and I'm proud to have them as the pollsters for my campaign. Chris and I crossed paths frequently during the Cruz for President campaign, and I've got a great deal of respect for the work he and the team at WPA Intel do. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, you bet, Raz. Good to talk to you again. It's been a while.
Yes, sir, it has. We got to cross paths a lot last year during the Cruz for President campaign, and got to see a lot of your work and a lot of time with you on the TV, as well as behind the scenes. Let's start out talking a little bit more about your background for the listeners, so they can get to know you a little bit better. Mm-hmm. How'd you get involved in politics, and what specifically brought you into the analytics and strategy research?
Well, it's sort of a long story because I've been doing it for a while. I happened to be in Austin, Texas today, and it brings back a lot of memories. It's kind of where my career began, because I served as executive director of the Republican Party of Texas back a fairly long time ago. And while I was there in that capacity, I had a background in economics. Had actually worked in a polling firm, and I'd run campaigns, been a manager for a guy named David McIntosh. He's now the head of the Club for Growth. I was his first manager when he was first elected to Congress back a long time ago. But while I took over the state party of Texas, Haley Barbour was the national chairman. And I went to him with a plan that I had written to get a grant to build an in-house polling operation. And there was a guy who had started a polling company on the Republican side back in the 70s, a guy named Lance Terrence. And he started a firm that still exists today called the Terrence Group. Lance hasn't been there since 1992, but I went to him and I said, hey, I want to work with you, and I'd like for you to sort of mentor me and teach me this industry. I want to build a polling operation from the ground up. And so he helped me write the plan. Haley Barbour funded it, and so we went and got computer-assisted telephone interface systems. We got 50 stations. I wrote the script myself for doing the interviews. I used to design the sample. I would run the crosstabs myself. So I basically built a polling operation from the ground up for the idea of doing polling for candidates running for state representative and state senator back in Texas. And back in those days, it's tough to imagine right now, but we weren't even close to majority in either house. Yeah. And so the ability to have true survey research that didn't cost the campaigns any money, because they didn't have the ability to raise money back then, being in the minority. They didn't have all the the donors that are willing to step up today. And from that, it was really an amazing experience. And after doing that, I was actually hired to go join a firm that had taken on the Dole for President campaign in 1996. And so I was a part of that team and just kind of kept doing it. Kind of my career kept growing. And then in the late 90s, 99, I got out of politics altogether and joined a PR firm, and ultimately became the global director of research for a company called Weber Shandwick, which at the time was the world's largest PR firm. And so I was able to grow my capabilities, if you will, from a political standpoint, apply those to the corporate world, but also learn a lot of the corporate techniques that I think are often lost in politics. And that's what pushed me into the areas that right now I feel like WPA has become a leader in, which is on the analytics side, the behavioral economics side, the ability to use psychographics and psychometrics, some of the things that Dick Wirthlin played with values research for Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, but it had really been shelved and Republicans hadn't used. And so that's why some of our techniques look so much different than other firms, that Republican firms, is because I really pulled those behavioral economics and psychographic and reputational research techniques that I learned at Weber Shandwick and brought them back into politics when I left there. And in 2005, started what is today WPA. At first, it was Wilson Research Strategies. Today is WPA. Just this week, we changed the name from WPA Research to WPA Intelligence because that really is more descriptive of what we do. We're not really a research firm per se anymore. We're an intelligence firm, a political intelligence firm that provides survey research and corporate survey and analytics and data and technology and programming and things like that. And so it all started, though, right here in Austin, Texas, at the Republican Party of Texas.
Well, that's a pretty huge shift, right? Going from doing campaign management and doing some of the ED work for the Party of Texas, shifting over to really launching what at the time was an incredibly sophisticated polling operation there, even when we're in the minority in Texas. What kind of catalyzed that? That's a big shift.
Well, it really was my background in economics, sort of the fact that I've always taken comfort in numbers. To me, I like the fact that even though I love liberal arts, I love reading, I love to write, but when you sit down and you do a math problem, it's either right or it's wrong. It's there's no teacher that's able to say, well, 2 + 2 does equal 4, but I don't like the way you drew your 4, so I'm going to give you a B on it. It's just it either is or it isn't. And so I've always taken comfort in data and numbers. And so even back when I was managing campaigns and doing sort of the kind of the exciting field and grassroots work that you're so good at today, and in doing that, I would build out models, even back in those days. They're very rudimentary models, trust me, but modeling in terms of looking at precincts and demographics and targeting. And so my default was always back to the numbers. And so I knew at some point whether it was, initially my goal was to, like anybody else who has a background in economics, was to go to Wall Street, but I just fell in love with
kind of got stuck
politics and ideology and trying to help conservatives win. And so that's which brings us full circle to, you and I trying to work to elect Ted Cruz as president just a year ago today. We were still churning and burning on that.
Yeah, a year ago we just locked down Wisconsin. That was kind of the high water mark, I guess, as far as things went. It was definitely a good day. 5
wins in a row. That was the 5th one.
Yeah, that was definitely the high water mark. But before we get to talking about the Cruz stuff, because I want to spend some time on that, let's go back to just kind of giving listeners an idea of how things have changed, because you've been involved in this for several decades, right? You've been around doing this for a while. You're a young guy, but you've been doing this for a long time. Give a little bit of perspective as far as how running polling and research and intelligence has changed in that time frame.
Well, it's remarkable how much has changed, and not just in the time frame and the decades, as you put it, that I've been around, but it's even just in the last few years. I'll give you a kind of a funny story. The first predictive model that we built at our firm was for Mike Lee, who was this little-known lawyer from the state of Utah that was challenging an incumbent U.S. senator named Bob Bennett. And our model, it was one model. It was predictive whether or not a Republican primary voter would go to the convention and support a conservative. And so we tried to run this model, and our computer power wasn't enough. So I got in my car and drove over to CompUSA and bought another computer and hooked it in, and it still kept crashing. We couldn't get it to run. And we ran Exchange servers locally on our server at that point. So everybody had to get off email for a week. And we had to shut down everybody's email so we could build that first predictive model about whether or not we could get somebody to, and our segment was those who would come out and support Mike Lee for U.S. Senate. So that is 2010. 2012, the second time we built predictive models, we had 2 candidates in 2012 that hired us to do it. One was Orrin Hatch, who said, whatever you did last year, I need you to undo it. And so we did do him. And then was also Ted Cruz in his runoff against David Dewhurst. We didn't do it in the primary, but in the runoff, we built a model of those who would support Ted Cruz, and that was a very effective targeting method for us. And so there, you look at, even in 2012, we had maybe a couple hundred pieces of consumer data, of appended data, online and offline data, for each voter. In the state of Texas, 15.5 million voters. And for Greg Abbott in 2014, who hired me to come in and do his race, we were up to about 800 pieces of consumer data. So it grew from 200 to 800 per vote. And that was the most. It really ranged from 600 to 400. And our overall process of building models, we built 8 different segments for Greg Abbott. And we did this. We built it and rescored the file on a nightly basis for all 15.5 million voters. So every single night, really from about Labor Day through Election Day, with the exception of Friday and Saturday night, we would rescore the entire file, and we could do it overnight. And the increase in our ability to do this really is from three things. One, it's the increase in data, personal data that is available for purchase. And some people act like that's a nefarious thing. Frankly, I think it's a positive thing. It's the reason why whenever you go on to Amazon, they know what you want to buy, and they help you. If you go to YouTube, they make suggestions on things you want to watch. And it is, to me, politics should work the same way, and I'm really an evangelist for that. But the second reason is Moore's Law, just the increase in computing power and what we can do. And then third is just limitless storage, the ability to go get Amazon Web Services and run our instances, run our predictive models, score the files, utilize an AWS, and we can do it just literally overnight. And that goes into 8 segments that we used for Abbott, and it was really revolutionary at the time. It was more than anybody else had done, or many had done. I think it probably was about what we had been exceeded by what Obama was done. We were still playing catch up there. But then you go to 2016. And you look at, again, 2014 for Abbott, there was 600 to 800 pieces of consumer data per individual. In 2016, so it was 2014, 2016, we were up to a really solid piece of voter information. We could have as many as 5,000 pieces of data appended to every individual. And if you look at, remember, for the entire campaign for Abbott, we built 8 voter segments. In Iowa, for Ted Cruz, we built 167 different voter segments. And it just shows you the growth that took place. And by the time we finished the campaign, the number of segments we built were I couldn't even count. We built 1,808 different predictive models that we utilized between Iowa and when we ended the campaign on May 3rd. And so I feel very confident during that time period we were able to catch where the Obama campaign had been. Now, I don't have any question that the Hillary Clinton campaign, because they had a very large data science operation, took it to an entirely new level. So we're to some extent playing catch up, even though we won the White House, because Trump's campaign was not really committed to using data and analytics in the same way that I think that we would have been if we'd been the nominee. I think Brad Parscale actually did yeoman's work in trying to get caught up to where others were, and frankly, I praise his efforts there. But from a standpoint of the growth that I've seen and the growth we've gone through, that's just talking about through 2010. If I were to go back through the differences that took place in the 2000s with things like cell phones and sampling methodologies and things like that, the science of survey research looks very, very different today than it did whenever I started. The challenge I think that exists on the Republican side, and you and I have talked about this before, is there are many of these firms that are still doing survey research on the Republican side the same way that today that they did it in 1994 whenever right. I first started. And that's really a problem. And frankly, it's why we lose a lot of races we should win, is because the Democrats have been more committed to the applying the advances in survey research and statistics and intelligence and data and technology, frankly, than we have. And whereas some firms, ours, I could speak to others like a Deep Roots and Target Point, and some of those have made serious investments in trying to grow and catch up and stay up and even exceed what Democrats are doing. Frankly, for the most part, it is we still kind of trail as a party on that case. And there's a guy named Daniel Kreis who wrote a book that I can't recommend more highly, Prototype Politics, who writes that coming out of the Obama campaign, just the Obama campaign, there were 16 different data and analytic firms that were started that now exist on the Democratic side. In all of Republican politics, when he wrote this book in 2015, there were 3 firms. So you can kind of compare the two. And there's been more that has been started since then, but it is we still trail a little bit, and it's unfortunate.
You talk about building those models, and those are not just static things. A lot of people think about you create a poll or do something like that. This is much bigger what you're talking about. You're talking about starting out with those hundreds of data points, and you build a model, but you're continually refining that on a daily basis, right? What are you feeding into that?
Well, it's a good question. You take new observations. An observation is a telephone call that captures information the same way that it is for a survey. But the difference is a survey will typically have on the minimum of 15 to as many as 50 or 60 questions on it. I mean, a lot of your listeners have probably gotten a survey research call. It took 20 or 30 minutes, and that's not odd. And that's something that we still do, although we do less and less of it because the advances in technology allow us to do so much more. So, but you're only going to make, even in a state as big as Texas, 600 to 800 to maybe 1,000 calls for that. For whenever we are rescoring the file on a nightly basis, and I'll use Texas as an example because it would be it varies some. We're going to make somewhere between a minimum of 4,000 to as many as 10,000 calls. Now, we're only going to ask the way we can do that is we only ask maybe 3 to 5 questions. But what it allows us to do is survey research is about targeting demographics. And if you're running a campaign in 2018 or 2017 in which you are targeting demographics, you're going to lose to the person who is targeting individuals. And that is what our ability to collect our collecting of those 6 to 8 to 10,000 observations on a nightly basis. And you don't do that every night. You will as you get close to the election. For the Abbott campaign, we will do that. For the Cruz campaign, we did that and will again this year. But for your typical congressional race, it's sort of like doing a survey research project, your state rep or state senate. And frankly, the thing that's lost and doesn't get advertised a lot because there's still so many firms that only do survey research, it actually costs about the same and sometimes less to do this. And so what we're doing by collecting all those different data points, we then upload it to the voter file. We do a quick match. We do a verification process to make sure that we didn't get some kid who was just pushing a lot of buttons or lying about who they were. We make sure that everything, the age, the gender, all the other demographics match up that we ask about. And then from that, we've already got the algorithm built as we begin the campaign, and we're rescoring the file. We're rerunning that predictive model and rescoring the file every single night. And again, in utilizing AWS and with the advances in Moore's law and increases computing power, we can have that done. I mean, again, at 14 and 16, it took overnight. I mean, now we're finishing these things up. We'll finish making phone calls by 9. We upload the data, do our verification. We're done with that by 11, start the process. We usually have our data back by 1:32 in the morning. And I get all jazzed up about it. I wake up and start, writing my report. It's
economics and number nerd comes out pretty strong when you start talking about
it. It does. And you're no longer talking about percentages. And that's what people get. I say, okay, right now, and I would do this all the time with Governor Abbott or with Senator Cruz last cycle. I'd say, well, what's the undecided percentage? So, well, I can tell you, and Texas, for a great example, against Wendy Davis, there's usually about 8. Say, well, Governor, or at the time it was General Abbott, there's 843,612 undecideds. It's like, well, what percentage is that? I'll go, who cares? Who cares what the percentage is?
That's the number.
Yeah, exactly. Now we're going to upload those, but it'll look like Universe on Facebook. We're going to go target them throughout the day. We know what they care about. We're going to feed it out to our phone banks and our field program, and we're going to go talk to people individually. Well, what percentage of them are male, female? Okay, I'll give you the exact numbers. And it's kind of, people have to relearn how to do things and learn that campaigns are no longer about percentages or demographics. They're about numbers. And it's the way the Democrats have run campaigns really since about 2010. And on our side, I would bet still only about 10 to 20% of campaigns are run this way.
I really love that so much of this has really brought us all the way back around to a very personal approach to politics. You're looking at the individual, not as some percentage, not as a block of votes. You're looking at the person, and you're talking about what matters to them most.
That's right. You really are. And I think it's what politics should be.
Yeah.
And that is, as people get into the process and they learn more about what we do, there's usually 2 reactions to it. There's one that you just had, and the second one is, wow, that's really creepy. I really just want to see an ad on TV. But the problem is, if you're running for Congress or state rep or state senate or city council for that matter, and you're talking about issues that a survey tells you a majority of people care about, well, it doesn't matter. Because if you're not talking about the issue that an individual cares about, and you can literally separate down to the household that maybe the wife cares about education, the husband cares about guns, and you pull that back out, you're no longer talking about a percentage and a demographic. You're talking about how to communicate to them individually. And so we work with all the different Republican walk apps utilizing our data management system. It's called Archimedes. And if you walk up to a door and Raz comes to the door and say, okay, well, Raz, you care about guns, and candidate Jim Smith, who I'm working for, cares a lot about guns too, and we're going to protect your Second Amendment rights and make sure you have the ability to go out and hunt as much as you want to, and the government's never going to take away your guns or require you to register them. And you're like, all right, great. But if your wife comes to the door and she cares about education because you have a little 2-year-old, just to make things up here, and say, well, I want to make sure we have good schools to go to. Well, let me tell you, candidate Jim Smith is really, he cares about schools, and you're talking about them about things that matter to them personally. You're not just sending a mail piece because most of the district cares about, I don't know, in a congressional race, could be repealing Obamacare or cutting taxes. Well, that may not matter to everybody individually. And so the key difference is making sure you're communicating with voters on an individual basis. And it really is it gets us back to kind of what the founding fathers intended for the process to be like.
I love it. Having that ability to put that best foot forward when you're going up to that door. I mean, we talk a ton about block walking and having that personal communication, and be able to put that best foot forward when you first shake their hand, you're first talking to them. Mm-hmm. That's how you get that vote. That's how you leave them with that positive impression that they like your candidate, they like you, and you talk to them specifically about what they care most about. And that kind of advantage is awesome.
Well, it is, and it's let's be clear here, though. It's not really an advantage when it comes to the Democrats. I mean, they have been doing this for a while. It's an advantage in a primary, no question about it. But on the Democratic side, I mean, they've got a platform called NGP Van Next that was developed coming out of the 2000. Really, it started with Howard Dean's campaign. It's kind of grown since then, in which they are much more collaborative in terms of the way they put their data together. Now, we are catching up with that on the Republican side. The development of data trust over the last couple of cycles has been a really important part of the Republican ecosystem from data and analytics, because it allows us, I mean, we take our data, we feed it back into it, and you have a very enriched process of communication, because whether we're collecting data, or I mentioned Target Point earlier, if they're collecting data, or Deep Roots is collecting data, or some of the other firms, as long as it's being fed back into it. The challenge that exists is most of the survey research firms don't feed this data back into it, and so we still are kind of in a catch-up mode, but we're getting a lot better than we used to be. But from an overall targeting perspective, I would say any campaign or any candidate that is not doing this today, frankly, is they're leaving a lot of their players back in the locker room, because they're really going out and taking the field with a 7-man team playing against an 11-man team.
I really appreciate the fact that there's folks like you that are out there in WPA that are doing a great job helping move us forward, though, because that's someplace that we are lacking, and it's someplace we have to have new people and stronger firms come out to fill that gap. And I think that's a pretty good bridge to talk about. You guys just rebranded WPA as WPA Intelligence. Talk to me a little bit more about what you guys do, kind of what's changed, and what you guys have to offer to campaigns and candidates.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Raz. I think from a standpoint of what we were looking at is, we had originally, when I started the firm, it was Wilson Research Strategies, and then became WPA Opinion Research. It was all about survey research, which in the mid-2000s, whenever I started, that was state-of-the-art from a technological standpoint. We applied new techniques to it, like I mentioned, behavioral economics and some behavioral cognitive sciences. But when we started moving heavily into analytics, 2010, 2012, 14 really kind of broke out. 16, I think we blew the doors off of what anybody else on the Republican side was doing, in my opinion. So some of our competitors might argue with that. But it looked at, as clients, potential clients were coming to us, it was as much about our tools to learn about voters as it was about for survey research. And so it became, as we kind of got together after the cycle, we did a corporate retreat and brought everybody together. We brought in some speakers and talked about where the analytics and data and research world was going and growing, and what was happening on the Democratic side. We brought in some academics who had really studied what was going on the Democratic side. We really came to the conclusion that the future of politics and the future of what we do is no longer about survey research. It's a part of it, but it's a tool in a toolbox that really is represented by an overall intelligence aspect. And what I mean by intelligence is it's political intelligence, it's voter intelligence, it's candidate intelligence, letting the candidate know, building out. We do as much we'll build analytic profiles and optimization aspects of where a candidate should travel. Like where, and you may remember that from the Cruz campaign,
yeah,
where we'd go into a state and we would know exactly where our prospective voters were, and then from that we would target where Ted would go spend his time from trying to get his media coverage. We do overlay media on top of it, and so it's pulling in everything that exists from that we can ingest from a data standpoint, from voter standpoint, from candidate standpoint, from television, from earned media, from door to door, from phone calls being made by volunteers, from press reports. I mean, literally everything that exists, and we ingest all that utilizing the platform I mentioned earlier called Archimedes. And to us, it's no longer research; it's really intelligence. And so that's why we kind of felt like as we grew into it, some of the other firms that are in our space have chosen names like labs and analytics and things like that. And those are cool, but we wanted something a little bit different, and so that's why we went with intelligence. Because we just felt like it was a more applicable name of what we do, or a representation of what we do.
Well, and as a quick note to the listeners, the way you guys were doing that, covering media coverage and helping identify where Ted should go, this was literally a daily thing. And this was a consideration that on the ground side, I know there was a lot of folks that had to hustle quickly because you might not know 12 or 24 hours out where you were going. So from the perspective of setting up events and staffing, advanced security, there were some people on the campaign trail that didn't always like that, but it did such incredible things for the campaign. It was awesome.
Well, it drove the media nuts as well. I mean, they used to complain to me all the time that they'd have to wait. The campaign would be waiting for my memo to come out in terms of where the undecideds were, where the persuadables were, and that we would then overlay and optimize Senator Cruz's schedule so he could go get the greatest degree of coverage on it. And they're like, I don't know whether I have to fly somewhere, we're in a car. I mean, you guys are killing me here. But you're right. It was frustrating, but it was also unprecedented from a political campaign standpoint. And I will say that's one area that I take a lot of pride in. We do that for all of our clients because it was so successful in the Cruz campaign. And you know, quite frankly, had Hillary Clinton had a travel optimization program like we built for Senator Cruz, she'd be president today. So thank God she didn't. But it is you can see very quickly how much it can matter.
Absolutely, because it was a really incredible thing seeing that live on the ground. I mean, I was out there with you guys there in Iowa where you were first rolling this program out. And when in the lead up there, you know, we felt like we were getting close. You guys had a higher degree of confidence because you were seeing the numbers. And those schedules were changing with Ted and going around to all these small different places. I mean, literally places where there might be 10 or 15 people, but you know that you knew that those 10 or 15 folks were the undecideds that were going to determine that precinct. And that really did some incredible work because, like you said, that had never been done on the Republican side at all, let alone in a primary race.
That's right. And, you know, it wasn't really just undecideds in Iowa. There was we built out a couple of segments, voter segments. Remember, a segment is just a couple of models overlaid on top of each other. And then pulling out the segment, you may have it split it 4 ways, 6 ways, 8 ways, and you pull out one of those segments, and that's how you target. And so from that, we built out segments called ORLOG. ORLOG is the Afrikaner word for war. And what the ORLOG segments were that we began to identify were those voters who were making their decision between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, but not considering Marco Rubio, or between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and not considering Donald Trump. Because we knew if we could isolate them in a two-part decision, and once they're going to fall into one of those two, right? And so if we could isolate them in that decision to put Ted in front of them in that scenario, whether it is on a person-to-person basis like you're talking about, or whether it's digital and we'd go hit them online because we knew who they were, or whether it's TV if we have the addressable or if we have an optimized TV buy, or if it's sending out our surrogates like Glenn Beck or Steve King or some of the others, or having this other friends on the ground where you guys were. That was the important part of it. So we would every single night run those ORLOG segments. It was so fascinating to watch because the first time we ran it, and I used to know these numbers a lot more clear, there was around 9,800, I think it was 9,817 or something like that, people making their decision between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. And so we just kept hitting them, pushing it down and pushing it down. And we knew right before we went into the election day, I think it was the election day was a Monday, the caucus. So like on Sunday was the last time we ran it, we were down to about, just like 700 or 800 or so. And we had pushed those. We'd watched them be moved from ORLOG, Trump Cruz, into Cruz. And we were watching that happen on an ongoing basis. But the other thing it allowed us to watch was the growth in the caucus turnout perspective, because as we were rescoring those models, we were also rescoring our turnout models. And think about this for a second. This is why all the polling was off, is because in 2008, 119,000 people voted in the Iowa caucus. In 2012, 124,000 people voted in the Iowa caucus. In 2016, 186,000 people voted in the Iowa caucus. So you had a growth of 60,000, almost a third new electorate. We were monitoring that on a nightly basis. We saw and that was what made up our sample. And so this is another aspect. Let's go back to survey research, kind of where we started, is if anyone listening to this podcast has a pollster that is doing their sampling on anything other than turnout models, they are doing it wrong. You cannot get survey research right today building a stratified sample based on, it was this much in 2014, so I'm sure it's going to be this much in 2018. That's just not the way it works. People don't, and I am increasingly convinced, Raz, that 2018 is going to be a turnout election. It's not going to be a persuasion election. I mean, primaries are different. Primaries are about persuasion. But in 2018, I'll give you an example in Nevada where Adam Laxalt is a client of mine. He's the Attorney General. Any of your older listeners may remember his grandfather, Paul Laxalt, who really should have been Ronald Reagan's vice president, but he was talked out of it by his political strategists, and because they said they couldn't have two people from the West. But Adam is Paul Laxalt, former Senator Paul Laxalt's grandson, and Adam is the Attorney General of Nevada. And Adam Laxalt in 2014 won statewide. And in Elko County, which is, if you think about the state of Nevada, it's the upper right-hand side, kind of on the northeastern side, he had 2,200 votes. Donald Trump in 2016 lost the state and got 6,600 votes. I'm rounding there. So you can think a 4,400 vote difference between a guy who won, got 4,400 less than a guy who lost. You can see real quickly, just in a state like Nevada, how much of an impact you can have if you can crack that code like we did in Iowa, on how to turn out those 4,400 additional voters in Elko County, and then multiply that by, I think there's 28 counties or something in Nevada. So, and look at Texas, 254 counties. And every single one of those counties, you can do that same math. And then Harris County or Tarrant County or Dallas County, how many different ways you can break it down by precinct to understand those differences. And anybody who is running for office, the STEER program ought to ask their pollster, their strategist, or whoever it is that's kind of helping them out with data, to very quickly run a scatter plot chart to look at the difference of Republican turnout by precinct. And I'm talking about even in Texas, 9,800 and 9,802 or whatever it is, precincts in Texas, that you should look at the difference between the delta between Republican turnout in a presidential year and a non-presidential year. And once you see at the upper part of that scatter plot where the largest delta is, that's where you want to be spending your time in 2018, because that's how Republicans are going to win or lose this year. Take Donald Trump out of the equation. You can't. But we have got to take our campaigns as conservatives and as Republicans into our own destiny, and that's how we do it.
Well, and you're talking about Iowa. That's an area where this principle was very highly at play, because we were going in, and the reason you said the polling was wrong was because they were looking at a much smaller universe of voters. Their turnout they expected in those polling models was like 115 or so, 120.
Yeah, that's right. Somewhere
there.
Between what happened in 2008 and 2012. That's,
yeah,
they took the middle. They took the middle.
Right.
Yeah,
and so we knew that if you're looking at I think it was like 130, 150, somewhere in there. I can't remember the exact number, but we were pretty sure that if it came in there or above, we were going to win.
Yeah, our model showed us winning anywhere under 190. At 190 is where Trump actually, you could see, I would put a line out every morning. It was sort of a CYA thing. It was a line chart, and you had at the bottom was the turnout. And as long as turnout was about under 190, once it got to 190 is about where it converged, and Trump started to catch us and pass us as it got to 200. And so you're exactly right. It was just and in some cases, like the Des Moines Register poll, was it was overestimating turnout. So you kind of had it all over the place. It was just people had no idea what was going on. You can see Nate Cohn, who is kind of the data guy, the analytics guy for the New York Times, had a quote yesterday. They were asking him about Georgia 6 and if he had built a model there. He said, "No, I'm glad I'm not, because I have no idea what's going on." And that's kind of what happened in Iowa. Is nobody had any idea what's going on. In Georgia 6, special election for Tom Price's seat, it's kind of the same sort of thing. People don't know whether the turnout's going to be really low or really high, and I anticipate it'll look a lot more like Iowa did. I think it's going to be a lot higher than people are expecting, but we'll see.
So from a campaign perspective, if I'm a state rep candidate or a large municipal candidate, somewhere on kind of the lower side of the size spectrum, what do I need to be looking at, either as far as analyzing public polls that are out there, or as I'm choosing a pollster, or looking at the work product that I got in front of me?
All right. So in terms of looking at a firm, what we tell our prospective clients is we'll do the analytics if you have another pollster, but we won't do the polling if you have somebody else doing the analytics, just because you kind of become arrogant about certain things that you do, I guess. But if I'm a candidate, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find out, if I'm hiring a pollster, is whether or not they do analytics, because I think you want someone who either does both or at least understands both. And I'll tell you, we've worked with a lot of polling firms where we're doing the analytics, they're doing it, and some on the Republican side, some are really good and get it, and some just see analytics as a pain in the butt that kind of takes a slice out of the pie that they would normally all come to them. And I won't mention names there, but I'll just say there are more of the former than the latter. And that's unfortunate because, we're all capitalists, I guess. So I think the first thing is if I'm talking to a polling firm, I ask them how they are going to build their sample in 2018. How are they going to decide who's going to turn out and vote? And they say, we're going to build a stratified sample looking at what's happened in the past. At that point, hang up. I'm done. Because anybody who is not building a 2018 sample off of a predictive model that is predicting voter turnout is just going to do it wrong, and they're going to be wrong. And that's why the polling in 2016 was so far off. And they were building models in 2016 that looked like 2012, when a lot of the states looked more like 2014 than they did 2012. And that's really probably the first thing. I think the second thing is just kind of a track record, because polling and data matter. And every year we put out, it's on our website, the percentage, our win ratio. And a lot of pollsters say, we don't have anything to do, we just give advice and move on. Well, I disagree with that. I think the fact is that if you're giving good advice and providing good direction to the campaign, it matters. And consistently, we started tracking this in 2010. We have exceeded a better than 20% win ratio over Republicans, and that is apples to apples. We look at our incumbents versus Republican incumbents as a whole, our challenger races versus challengers as a whole, and our open seats versus open seats as a whole. compare it against the rest of the Republican Party. If someone says, well, where are you versus this other firm or something like that, we can look at that too. And we've been as low as 18, and this year we were 30 points higher. I think it's 34 or so to be exact. And, that matters. It has big impact. I mean, we could not maintain that on an ongoing basis if we were doing bad work. And I think the same could be true, as we said, of anybody else. And so I would ask what their win ratio is and what their win ratio is compared to Republicans as a whole. Because it matters and it has a big impact. Because if you're giving a candidate data and they're targeting based on that data, and you're saying these are your undecideds and these are the people who are lean toward you, and you go and target them and talk to those people, it should be just coloring by numbers, right?
Well, and that comes back to why you guys have rebranded as Intelligence, why you do so much work on the analytics side, because just giving a bunch of numbers or a data file or a spreadsheet to a campaign, that's not going to inform what they do, what the decisions they make as far as where they go, who they talk to, what issues they target. You guys focus on turning that information into usable intelligence they can weaponize on the campaign trail.
We do, and I think that's really the key. But I'll tell you the other part of it that I think is one of the reasons why I'm going to step back a little bit here, that I think we have a better win ratio, is because, Raz, it's something that's dear to our hearts. We work for conservatives. We take on U.S. senators like a Bob Bennett in Utah, where we find a Mike Lee who's better. We take on a sitting lieutenant governor in David Dewhurst, who everybody expects to win, with some random guy named Ted Cruz, because those things matter. And, we do work for the Club for Growth. We do work for the House Freedom Caucus. We do work for just about every crazy right-wing conspiracy group out there. And I think that's the other reason why, is because we end up with the better candidates. And there are a few issues that are deal breakers for us. And so when we do a campaign, when we do a candidate pitch, it's as much as us interviewing them as it is them interviewing us, because we probably don't take there's a lot of races we could take that we don't, because the candidate just isn't a good fit. And I want to be proud of my client roster whenever I'm done, because I don't do this just for the purposes of, because I can't, because there's not other things out there. I do it because I really care, and I care about the issues that are important to, I know you as well. And so from that, that matters. And to me, that's also intelligence. It's knowing the candidate you have, and it's knowing what he or she believes in, and being able to relate to that. Because I'll tell you, let's say I did work for just about anybody, and I had a moderate, I probably couldn't help them very much in terms of their communication. It's just like, I'm not a good, I'm not good at masking my feelings.
Well, I'll tell you, Chris, that's something I really respect about you, and part of why I've enjoyed watching the work you've done for Ted and Lee and others is ultimately for both of us, this is a passion. We love being involved in politics, and we realize that the work that we do, it has policy implications. It influences the way that the world works around us, and these state governments work, the federal government, and we know that on some level we're held responsible for that. And so I appreciate the fact that you share that dedication to working for conservatives and fighting those good fights. And you've definitely done a lot of great work. Something that comes to mind recently is talking about the AHCA vote a few weeks ago, looking at the conservative case for why we shouldn't pass this swamp care bill. And you guys did an awesome project that I want to just brag on for a second, looking at modeling and comparing how AHCA, the swamp care bill, compared with the favorability of Obamacare and with the full repeal. Talk about that just a little bit.
Well, you're right, we did, and it was unfortunately. I wish we'd gotten it done about a few days earlier. We had some verification issues there where we had to go back and do a little bit more on the phone call side. But it was, I wanted to get the data out quickly, but sometimes you do got to get it right. So it came out right after. And so what we did is we showed that when we compared nationally, we looked at the 10 Trump Senate. I'm saying that the wrong way, but the 10 Democrats in Trump ones that are having to run for re-election in states that Trump won, the Mansions, the Heidkamps, the McCaskills.
Right.
And then we looked at the House Freedom Caucus members. And we showed on a state-by-state basis on those 10 states, on a national basis, and in each one of those Freedom Caucus districts, that when it comes down to it, the House Freedom Caucus has probably saved the Republican Party from itself, because had they passed Ryan Care, we would have been in a very difficult situation. And I think we probably would have given Senate seats that right now are still ours for the taking over to the incumbents in those states, because they would have had a really strong issue to run against Republicans on. This is an issue we have to get right. And it's and in doing what we did, the purpose of that was to be able to give to our clients, and we do monthly modeling updates for the purposes of the turnout scores that I've mentioned a few times, and to be able to pull out, we look at certain issues that we want to then be able to give to our clients, that they can know if they want to go talk to people who are definitely for repealing Obamacare. Here's the list, number of people in their district, and that's what I put in that Medium post. Here are the people who support full repeal in place. Pull that list out. Here are the people who are against the HCA, and just the ability to be compare those against each other. And for everything we have, here are the people who support it. We have those who oppose it. I mean, it's binary. It's going to be one or the other.
Well, I really appreciate the fact that you guys did so much work on that. It provided a great piece of information and some great data for us to work with. I did a write-up on the Resurgent about it, and even though it may have come out immediately after the bill got pulled, as they're looking at reintroducing it or doing some amended version coming back after this recess, there's going to be a lot of great use we can get out of that. So thank you for that.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, and I really appreciate you coming on today. I know that our time is short, but I wanted to wrap up just letting folks know where they can find you online and where they can come to talk to you guys about intelligence and what you can do for them at WPA.
WPAintel.com, WPA Intel. So WPAintel.com. And then my Twitter handle is @WilsonWPA.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate it. Thank you again for joining us today. I want to also give a shout out to our sponsor, Campaign Sidekick, saying thank you for their support. Check out the show notes for Chris's contact information and all the links that we referenced during the show, and we'll talk to y'all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.